Hello fellow birders, my name is Shayna Cossette and welcome to my channel. In today's video, we are going to be talking about the must-know terminology in birding. So if you're a beginner birder and you're looking to understand what some of these words are, this is going to be the perfect video for you, whether you're brand new or have been dabbling in the birding world off and on. So the first term that we have today is birding. What is birding? Birding is the hobby or the act of intentionally going out to look for birds in their natural habitat. And birding is a very diverse hobby. There are birders in the hobby who specialize more on birding by sound, birding by sight, and then others like myself prefer to use cameras to capture the birds that they are observing. But whether you are looking out your window at a bird that passes by in your feeder or on a excursion into somewhere tropical to find a super rare bird, it all falls under the umbrella of birding as long as you're not looking at an animal in captivity or in a zoo. The next term I want to define for you is a lifer. Now, a lifer is the first bird of a species that you observe and identify. Some people debate whether you have to identify it yourself or if somebody else can identify it. I tend to go by it's the first bird that you see of a species, whether you identified it or somebody in your group identified it. So if you hear someone refer to seeing a bird as their lifer, that means it is the very first bird of that species that they have seen, and it's often something that birders get really excited about because we actually track our lifers usually. And so speaking of tracking lifers, the next definition I want to go over is a life list. So a life list is the cumulative list of all of the lifers you have seen in your birding journey so far, and often in the birding world they are actually numbered. So you will hear people refer to having X number of birds on their life list or lifer list, and this is just because it is a sort of metric that birders can use to compare with one another, a metric of birding experience. If somebody has a lot of lifers, like in the thousands, they are most likely a very experienced birder and have really good bird ID skills, and people who are newer and haven't had enough time to collect lifers often have a lower number of lifers. And so my lifer count right now on eBird is around 166, I want to say, 65, somewhere in there. But my actual life list from before I started using eBird is a little bit closer to 200. Anyway, so the life list is just the list of all of the lifers that you have seen in your birding journey. And since I mentioned eBird, why don't we use that as the next term? So in the birding world, you might hear eBird a lot. And if you've never communicated with people, or if you've been in the Facebook groups and see eBird this, eBird that, but don't actually know what it is, eBird is an app and a website that was created to count and compile and track birding observations in the world. And so you submit your sightings as well as you can attach pictures and sound to the eBird database, and it will actually compile your life list for you. So it's a way to keep track of all of your lifer observations, submit data that can be used by researchers in citizen science projects, and overall contribute to the knowledge base database of birding in North America and the world. So it's a really cool website and app, and if you've never used it or poked around in it, I highly recommend it. It's a great tool to have in your birding arsenal. Another term you might hear in birding, similarly around the eBird app, is a rare bird. And so a rare bird has a couple different levels, but it basically means a bird that is uncommon for either the time of year in your area or uncommon to your area in general. And so that's where the different layers kind of come in, because you can have a regional rarity, so a bird that is not rare in your country but rare in your region, and that can be for both time of year but also just any time of year it can be a rarity. And then there are kind of upper level country rarities, birds that don't really show up in your country that often. And then there are the like super mega rare, you get a really obscure international bird that shows up, and that's where you get a lot of these stories of people flocking to rare bird alerts and hundreds of birders traveling to try to see this one bird. But rare bird means that it's uncommon for your area or for your area in that time of year. The next definition is a little bit less of a birding specific term and more of a slang term that you often hear, and that is binos. So if you've heard binos and don't know what it means, it's just a shorthand form for binoculars. These are my Vortex binoculars. I use them all the time in birding, but if you hear somebody say binos, it's just the short form for binoculars. Sparkbird is a term that you may not have heard even if you've been birding for a little while. And basically what it means is it is the bird or species of bird that sparks your passion or interest in bird watching and birding in general. So that can be a specific individual that got you curious about what its identification was and kind of opened up the world of birding to you, or it could be a specific species that you really, really love and have a passion for, and going out and seeing it got you interested in going out and finding other birds. Some people might have more than one spark bird. Others may just have a single individual that they can really pinpoint as the start of their birding journey. But either way, a spark bird is something that sparks that passion for birding in your life. The next birding definition I have will often come into play if you are trying to identify a bird that you're not exactly sure what it is, and that is the definition of field markers. So field markers are characteristics visible on a bird from the field, and they're used primarily for identification. So this is the instance where perhaps the color above the eye could be a field marker to help you determine between two species, wing patterns, breast colors, eye rings, beaks, any sort of characteristic that would be visible either to the eye or through binoculars or through a camera that can be used to identify birds in the field. There are other ID characteristics that can be used to determine species, but some of them are so small and minute that you may have to look at a skeleton or under a microscope, and that's kind of not something that's really viable in the field. So when we're speaking about field characteristics or field markers, that is ID features we can see while we're out in the field actively birding. And the final definition for today is a field guide or an ID book. Field guides are super, super handy because it is basically a collection of species and how to identify them, including what they look like, what their range is, what their calls sound like, and more, all into a single book that you can use to reference in the field, which is often why it's called a field guide or an identification book. And if you haven't picked up a field guide for your birding, I highly, highly recommend them. They will make your life so much easier when you're trying to identify species instead of having to wait to go home and Google everything. And this Sibley Bird 2nd edition for North America is my favorite go-to guide. It has every bird that you'll most likely come across if you're birding in the United States or Canada. And so I really, really recommend this if you're looking for a guide recommendation. But there's also a lot of guides that are local to specific states and provinces that if you're a little bit intimidated by a book this big, you can definitely start on a smaller scale. So these are all the beginner birding terms that I think you should know regardless of where you are in your birding journey, but especially if you're just starting out. So hopefully this makes things a little bit less intimidating when you're in Facebook groups or other community chats. When you hear these terms and before maybe weren't 100% sure what they meant, and now hopefully knowing their definitions, you can feel a little bit more comfortable engaging in discussions in the birding community. If there are other terms that you would like to know the definitions for, I do have a list of some more advanced birding terms, but also drop any term suggestions in the comments for future videos. Thank you guys so much for watching, and happy birding.